Alright, welcome back. This is Sam Messman from We Make Movies, and this is the Final Cut 10 Red Workflow Part 2 tutorial. In this tutorial, I'll be showing you how to work with your red footage in your timeline and how to create and finish your edit for multiple different resolutions using your red footage. Anyway, let's get started. And the first thing I want you to do is go into your project library and make a new project. This is going to be our offline project. I'm going to label it Bed-Stuy Offline. And there's a couple settings I want to make sure you do. I tend to cut offline in 1080, and at 2398 is where I'm going to settle for this project. You can use any resolution you want. I tend to choose 1080 because it's the easiest and most flexible for screenings or playback or viewing for client delivery. So that's where I'm going to settle, but feel free to use any one you'd like, and let's go ahead and get going with our edit. So go ahead and step into your event browser. I'm in mine, and you'll notice some of them still have the yellow caution signs on them. That's because we're still in proxy mode and I haven't transcoded those to proxy. But what I'm going to do now is I have transcoded a few clips to proxy that we're going to use for our offline edit, and I'm going to insert those into the timeline as we speak. And let's go ahead and take a look at what Final Cut X does with spatial conform settings first. So the first thing I want you to do is go ahead and select a range of clips. And the range that I'm selecting is a group of clips that were shot at 2K resolution using the Epic camera. And what we're going to do now is go into the video tab of the inspector, and as I showed you earlier, the default setting for clips is fit. Now, one thing you can do is apply spatial conform settings to multiple clips in the timeline at the same time. I just set these to fill, and as you can see in all of these clips now, there are no black bars that would show the different aspect ratio that the footage was shot at. So this is now a full frame 16:9 timeline that I'm working with. And this ability to group select and then quickly modify any of the raw settings, whether it's spatial conform, transform, raw, any of that stuff is a huge time saver as you go through your edit with your red footage in Final Cut 10. Now, since we are working in proxy mode, there are a couple things you need to be aware of as you move through your edit. Now, let's say, for instance, you have a clip that you want to make a modification to its raw settings. Well, let's go ahead and try and do that. Select the clip in the event browser, then go into the info tab of the inspector and select modify red raw settings, and what you're going to see is a dialog box telling you basically that you're going to need to retranscode that footage in order to get access to any changes you make to that clip's raw settings. So go ahead and click continue there, and what you're going to see happen is your clip will go offline and the red raw settings box is going to come up. So if you can't see your raw footage, what do you have to do to modify the raw settings to this clip? Well, you're going to have to go back into your preferences and go back under playback and go under your original media to see your red footage come back online. And as you can see there, all of the yellow caution signs have gone away, and now you can go through and make modifications to the raw settings. I'm doing something awful to this clip just so that it will be really easily recognizable when we retranscode. You should use better taste than what I'm doing here, and then click apply. And go ahead and close out of the red raw HUD, and let's go ahead and retranscode this clip so that it comes back into our edit. So right click the clip, click transcode media, and then create proxy media. And this is going to take a minute, especially if you have multiple clips that you're fixing. And let's go ahead and set our preferences back so that we're looking at our proxy media again. So go back into the preferences, and once again switch back over to use proxy media, and as you'll see, your clip in the timeline that's transcoding has now gone back offline because it's not done transcoding. However, when it is done, it will automatically show back up online so you can continue editing as this is transcoding, and what you had will just appear back in your edit. And would you look at that, we've stepped forward in time and your clip is now done transcoding and back in your edit. And I'm going to show you now some stuff that you should be aware of as you adjust the transform properties in your edit. So select a clip and go into the inspector and set the scale to a really high value. Then go back into your timeline and select a range of clips, and I want you to set the scale of those to 50%. So that there's going to be a huge disparity between the two clips. And what I'm going to show you now is that depending on what you need to do with your transform properties, there are different ways to go about it to achieve different effects. So what I want you to do now is select all of the clips that you just affected, including the one that you scaled up, and adjust the scale collectively to those so that all of the clips that you just affected are now being changed. And what you're going to see is that when you adjust it in the inspector, all of those clips are now at the same size, meaning that that first clip you just affected has lost the transform changes that you applied to it. So undo that. And this time we're going to do the exact same thing, except that we're going to affect the transform properties using the transform tool in the viewer. So push Shift T to get into the transform tool in the viewer, and now I want you to adjust the scale directly in the viewer. And let's go ahead back into our timeline and see what happened to that scaled in clip, and you'll see that those group changes were now applied to that clip. And what this means is that if you want to preserve changes that you've made to individual clips across a group adjustment, you should use the transform tool. If you want to override changes, you should use the inspector and type in a value. So if you're conscious of the way that Final Cut 10 handles position and transform changes, you're going to have a lot more control over the resizing of your red media as you go through your edit. So anyway, let's go ahead and pretend that our use of slates and lack of sound was a creative choice approved by the client, and that we are now finished with our offline edit and we're now ready to online our movie. So go ahead and jump back into the project library, and let's go ahead and duplicate our project by right-clicking on it and select Duplicate Project. And that's going to bring us into a new window where we're going to rename our new project to call it Bed-Stuy Online. And then we're going to go down and select our drive. I want to switch over to a Thunderbolt drive, so I'm going to select my Thunderbolt drive, which is where this new project and event is going to go to. And then I'm going to select Duplicate Project and Use Clips. And then I'm going to rename the new event to be Bed-Stuy Online. And what this is going to do is make a new event and place only the used clips that I've put into my project. And I'm going to press OK, and Final Cut's going to make a new event and project that only references the media I've already used. So let's click on that new event, and as you can see, only the clips that were in my project are now in that event. And what I want you to do now is go ahead and jump into the Finder, and we're going to see what Final Cut has placed in that new event. So click over, I'm going to click over to my Thunderbolt drive, and I'm going to go into Final Cut Events and select Bed-Stuy Online and go into the Original Media tab, and you'll see that it has folders with all of my red media which contain clip references and the red metadata files for each clip in my sequence. And if we jump over to the transcoded media folder, we're going to see that Final Cut 10 has also placed the proxy files that I've used in my sequence in there as well. Anyway, one problem I now have is that even though it's made a new event referencing my used clips, Final Cut 10 is not referencing that used media on my Thunderbolt drive. It's referencing the original R3D folders on my eSATA drive. And the reason for that is that when we originally made our offline event, we didn't select the copy files to Final Cut Events folder checkbox under the import preferences. So the question now is, how can I get my red media that I used in my project in my new event to be placed on my Thunderbolt drive for better performance? Well, there's actually an easy way to do that. So let's go ahead and jump back into Final Cut. And we're going to scroll down to Organize Event Files under the File menu. This is going to bring up a dialog telling us that it's going to copy all of the media in our event to the original media folder on our drive. And what it's basically going to do is bring all of the files that were living outside of our event into our new event so that all of our media is now living in one place. And this is going to take a little while to transfer, but once it's done, we're going to be referencing all of our red files from our Thunderbolt drive, and our performance is going to be much better than it had been, and we'll be able to online our movie in the most efficient way possible. Anyway, let's go ahead and open up our Bed-Stuy online sequence, and the first thing we're going to do is go up to our preferences, and let's go ahead and switch back to our original media so that we're working off our original R3D files. We're now done with our proxies, so feel free to delete those if you'd like to, and let's go ahead and start onlining our movie. And we'll start off by grading the raw footage that's in our project by selecting our Bed-Stuy online event and then going into Modify Red Raw Settings on the first clip in our event browser. And if you go in, you can see that I'm making adjustments to the tint. I'm overdoing it for effect, and I'm going to switch clips, and what you'll see is this dialog pop up saying that I can either apply or cancel the settings I just applied. We're going to cancel for now, and when I go back to the other clip, you'll see no changes have been applied. And the reason for that is that when using the raw HUD in Final Cut 10, you must click apply to any changes you make before moving on to another clip, or you're going to see that dialog box appear. So I'm going to keep that clip selected now, and I'm going to go back into the HUD and make the same changes I applied earlier, and this time I'm going to click apply, and I'm going to move on to another clip, and you'll see that that dialog box will not appear again. And now I'm going to select a range of clips, and I'm going to make adjustments to the FLUT parameter on those, and I'm going to click apply again, and that FLUT change will now be applied to all of those clips that I selected. Now, what if you don't like changes you made and you want to go back to your original settings over a range of clips? We'll select all of the clips that we just applied changes to and go to Revert to Neutral Values. And what that's going to do is have Final Cut revert all of the sliders that you've manipulated back to their default neutral values on the clip you've selected or range of clips that you've selected in the event browser. You also have the option of reverting to the original camera metadata, which is going to switch all of your settings back to how they were originally shot on set. In this case, changing our color space and gamma space back to red color 2 and red gamma 2, which is how they were shot on set. So let's revert those back to red gamma 3 and red color 3 and click apply, and we're pretty much going to be right back to where we started. So feel free to use all of those principles to go through and grade your raw footage in a way that you are happy with. And now what I'm going to show you is how to use the timeline index to quickly select and modify clips at various resolutions and aspect ratios. So click the timeline index button and make sure tags is selected. And I've got a bunch of 5K footage at the end of the sequence that I'm going to select. And the reason I'm able to do this is because back in part 1 we went ahead and keyworded all of our different R3D footage for its various resolutions, and now those tags are showing up in the timeline index, and when we click on one it'll select the clip that it's applied to. And you'll notice when I select my 5K tags at the end of the sequence, those clips are quickly selected, and now I can make changes to them as a group and resize accordingly. This is hugely helpful if you have a lot of different clips shot at different aspect ratios that you want to make global changes to but are all spread throughout your sequence. Anyway, go ahead and take some time now to get used to the timeline index and selecting groups of your clips and modifying them, because I think you're really going to find that it's going to help your workflow. And also remember that the timeline index is searchable, and you can search based on clip name, based on role. There are a whole lot of different uses that I'm not going to cover here, but just know that the possibilities and various applications of the timeline index are pretty limitless. And once you're done playing around, go ahead and select all of your clips, and I'm going to show you how to letterbox your entire movie by using a compound clip. So go ahead and right click your clips and select make new compound clip, and I'm going to call this Bed-Stuy letterbox. And then I'm going to push OK, and Final Cut's going to make a new compound clip that's going to place it in an event of my choice. And as you can see, all of the clips I've selected have been placed now into one clip. And if you're familiar with Final Cut 7, this is very similar to what a nest used to do. Anyway, what I want you to do now is go into the Stylize tab of your effects browser and select the letterbox effect and place it on your compound clip. Now, go up into the inspector with the clip selected, and you can adjust the various different aspect ratios to your choosing, and you'll see that Final Cut will automatically place black bars over all of the clips in your sequence, which means that you can adjust the transform properties independently and then place this filter on it, and all of your resizes and all of that stuff will now look consistent in your edit. Anyway, this is usually the last thing you do before finishing, so let's go ahead and break apart our compound clip because there's a couple other things I want to show you. And what I want you to do now is go ahead and jump into your project library. And what we're going to do here is take our finished 1080 sequence, and we're going to turn it into a 4K master that we can then export as a 4K file if we have a 4K deliverable, for example. So what I want you to do now is go ahead and select that little wrench icon on the bottom of the inspector, and that's going to bring up your project properties. Now go to your render settings, and what you should do here is set this setting to whatever your final deliverable is, because that's going to dictate how Final Cut 10 renders all of your render files within your timeline. So if you know, for instance, that your distributor wants a ProRes HQ master, you should set your render setting to ProRes HQ, and that's how Final Cut will render all of your media and all of your color corrections and transform settings. And if you know you're nearing the end of your edit and getting ready to master, generally you're going to want to select something like ProRes HQ or ProRes 444, as those are going to give you the highest quality renders. Anyway, go ahead and click OK, and now we're going to go ahead and duplicate our online sequence. So select duplicate project, and we're going to rename this Bed-Stuy Online 4K, and we're going to make sure duplicate project only is selected, and then we're going to go down and click OK, and it's going to make a new project called Bed-Stuy Online 4K. Now select that project and go back to that wrench icon, and we're going to change the resolution of this sequence to a 4K sequence. And there are multiple different aspect ratios within that, so select one that you're comfortable with, and then we'll keep this at 23:9:8 and click OK. And what you're going to see is that there's a subtle scaling adjustment in that sequence, and what that is showing you is how Final Cut has adjusted the scaling of your clips and transform settings to now live in a full 4K sequence. And what that means is that Final Cut has automatically taken all of the changes you've made in your 1080 sequence and scaled them accordingly so that they will now look identical in scale to how they looked in the 1080 sequence, and it has fully filled the 4K frame. So a quick way of testing this is that if you go to that clip that we scaled up earlier in this lesson, you'll see that that clip still has the same proportions, however it doesn't look nearly as good, and there's a lot more noise because that scaling adjustment doesn't look nearly as good in a 4K sequence as it did in a 1080 sequence. So if you know that you want to master to 4K, you need to be conscious of how you're affecting your images and how that's going to look down the line when you master your sequence. So anyway, feel free to go through now your finished sequence and adjust accordingly, make any more changes, maybe letterbox it, do final color correction, or even send an XML out to Resolve, degrade there, and then send it back. In Resolve, you can send multiple different XMLs of the sequence into the same project, and all of the graded material from a given sequence in your media pool will then be reflected over your various XMLs, so it'll be really easy to export multiple versions of the same sequence and then bring those back into Final Cut and export a final master from there. So that's going to pretty much do it for the Red Workflow tutorial series. I know, as a person who has been onlining and finishing films in Final Cut 7, especially Red films, what Apple's done with this new release for Red footage has made me extremely happy, and it's made my workflow a lot easier and a lot more efficient. So I'm excited to be using this tool. I've used it on a couple projects already, and I can't tell you how much faster it is and how much easier it's made my life as an editor and colorist. So anyway, I hope you guys got something out of this, and it makes your lives as editors and colorists a little bit easier as well. And also, all the steps from this tutorial have been posted in the description below, and if you have any questions or things you notice that you want to add to this workflow, post them in the comment section and I'll try and get back to you. At the end of the day, the goal here is to make all of this stuff as seamless and easy as possible, and I'd love your feedback on how to make it all better. And if you watch this and it all went totally over your head, or you just don't feel like doing it, well, this is what I do for a living, so feel free to hire me either to consult on your movie or to finish your film for you if that's what you need. So if you want to get in touch, just drop me an email over at sam@wemakemovies.org. And lastly, if you're wondering what this whole We Make Movies thing is, check us out over at wemakemovies.org, or if you live in LA or Toronto, sign up for our newsletter and then come to one of our events. I'll see you guys next time.
And cut!